Let me do what a lot of these AAA is collapsing videos refuse to do, and actually build the case instead of whispering over sad music. The problem is not one bad game, one buggy patch, or one publisher having a rough quarter. The problem is a chain. Budgets exploded. Higher budgets made executives more afraid of failure. That fear created safer design, sequel addiction, remake addiction, trend chasing, live service obsession, and weaker tolerance for experimentation. Those bad bets then led to flops, layoffs, studio restructures, rushed launches, angry players, and more executive panic. That is the loop. It is not mysterious. It is not subtle. It is a machine that keeps producing the same mess, because the incentives reward the mess. Start with the money, because the money is where the illness begins. Once a major game costs hundreds of millions to build and market, the publisher stops seeing it as a game. It becomes a corporate operation that has to justify years of payroll, giant advertising campaigns, investor expectations, and post-launch monetization plans. At that point, the first question in the room is no longer, is this sharp? It becomes, will this sell everywhere, upset nobody important, support premium editions, and keep people spending after launch? That shift wrecks priorities. Design stops leading. Finance takes the wheel. Everybody else gets dragged behind the car. That is why so many big releases look expensive and still feel dead in the hands. If you're watching this thinking, yep, the industry lost its mind, hit like, subscribe, and drop your take below. The money goes into visual detail, cutscenes, huge maps, celebrity talent, motion capture, and the kind of marketing blitz that tries to convince you a preload timer is a world event. Meanwhile, the actual game part, the combat feel, mission structure, level design, pacing, enemy variety, and the sense that the designers had a point, gets treated like a secondary concern. You end up with something that looks amazing in a trailer, and feels like a boardroom compromise. Once you start playing, it shines, it loads, it technically works. Then you realize you are playing a very polished argument between 20 nervous managers. Show the receipt on screen, if you want. Put the photorealistic face beside the hollow mission. Put the giant map beside the copy-paste outpost. Put the layoffs headlines in a scrolling wall, while management says it is streamlining for the future. That is the trick with this whole era. The polish is real. The spectacle is real. The value underneath it keeps shrinking right in your face. That leads straight into safe design, and safe design is where boredom becomes policy. If you are betting that much money on one release, you do not want a weird mechanic, a risky tone, a strange setting, or a structure that might split the audience. You want familiar product. You want a box you can explain to investors in one sentence. That is why the same formulas keep coming back. Open worlds full of chores. Skill trees pretending that 2% more damage is a thrilling choice. Crafting systems that exist because somebody in management thinks crafting automatically means depth. Side content inflation, so the game can boast 100 hours, even if 40 of them feel like unpaid clerical work. None of that is accidental. That is what happens when companies fear original ideas more than they fear boring the customer. And this is where the live service rot fits in, because safe design and live service greed are really the same disease wearing different hats. Publishers looked at Fortnite and saw an infinite money fantasy. They saw recurring spending, seasonal engagement, premium cosmetics, and a customer base trained to log in constantly. Naturally, every executive wanted one. Why sell a finished game once when you can turn the audience into recurring rent? That was the pitch. Build a forever game, stretch engagement. Sell progression, convenience, status, and fear of missing out back to the player in slices. Then act like this is the future, instead of a glorified shift schedule with better fonts. The problem is that players are not machines. They do not have infinite time, infinite money, or infinite tolerance for second jobs disguised as hobbies. Most live service projects were fighting over the same hours and the same wallets. Only a handful were ever going to dominate. Everybody else was running into a crowded market with a thin launch, a broken launch, an overpriced launch, or a monetization system designed by people who should not be allowed near ordinary human beings. That is why the graveyard got crowded. Babylon's fall, Suicide Squad's struggles, Concord's implosion, and the wider industry pullback were not random accidents. They were the result of executives copying the same model, without understanding that most players do not want 10 different games, demanding daily obedience. Now we get to layoffs, and this is the part where the whole thing stops being merely stupid and becomes contemptible. The industry bragged for years about growth, engagement, expansion, and scale. Then the second those projections stopped looking magical enough, companies started cutting staff in waves. And of course, the people who paid for management failure were not the executives who approved the bad bets. It was the developers, artists, writers, testers, support staff and producers who actually made the games. Ubisoft's Red Storm cuts are one clear example of the pattern. A legacy studio loses 105 jobs and gets reduced to support functions, while management keeps talking about prioritization and efficiency. That language always sounds clean. The reality is that the people with the least power keep paying for the mistakes made by the people with the biggest titles. It also wrecks production. When studios lose experienced workers, they lose memory, technical knowledge, pipeline stability, and the people who know which mistakes are about to happen before they happen. Then leadership acts baffled when the next project slips, launches rough, or feels stitched together by teams who inherited half a plan and none of the context. Of course it does. You cannot cut the people who know how the machine works and then act surprised when the machine starts coughing bolts into the carpet. Now look at AI, because this is the newest executive daydream, and it tells you exactly where their heads are. The issue is not that every automated tool is evil. The issue is the reason suits get excited about it. They are not usually imagining better art, better writing, or more time for human creativity. They are imagining cheaper labor, faster content generation, and fewer people to pay. That is the fantasy. Press a button. Generate filler. Pad the map. Fill the dialogue tree. Replace costly human effort with machine-assisted sludge and call it innovation. The industry is making a giant assembly line for boring games. Management talks about that like it is a miracle instead of an admission of bankruptcy at the level of imagination. But AI is not the only way management is trying to automate success. When they are not dreaming about replacing the writers, they are digging up old franchises because a recognizable name feels safer than a new idea. That is the bridge into franchise fatigue, and it is not complicated. Brand recognition looks good on a quarterly report. A fresh concept looks risky. So calendars fill up with remasters, remakes, sequels, reboots, and legacy brands dragged back onto the stage for one more lap. Some of those games are good. That is not the point. The point is that nostalgia became a shield. Instead of building new pillars, publishers keep polishing old trophies and hoping nobody notices that the room is getting emptier. Digital ownership made the whole thing uglier, because players finally saw how much control publishers wanted after the sale. For years, companies trained customers to accept that buying a digital game often meant buying limited access under terms that could still change later. Server dependency, delistings, shutdowns, and disappearing functionality all pointed to the same ugly truth. The company wanted your money without giving you durable control over what you bought. That is why ownership fights matter. Once players see purchased games become unusable, the debate stops being abstract and starts feeling like theft with nicer legal language. That is also why PC still matters so much. This is not just tribal fanboy nonsense. PC remains important because it offers more flexibility, more preservation, more mods, more community fixes, and more resistance to total corporate control. If a publisher walks away, players sometimes keep the game alive anyway. That matters. It means the customer is not completely trapped inside a company's preferred definition of ownership, which is usually just temporary permission wrapped in customer support language. Meanwhile, indie games keep exposing the weakness of the AAA model. Smaller teams cannot usually compete on raw spectacle, so they compete on clarity, focus, novelty, and conviction. They build around stronger ideas instead of trying to become permanent lifestyle software with swords. That is why players keep finding more excitement in cheaper games that know what they are. An indie hit does not need to be perfect to embarrass a bloated blockbuster. It just needs a pulse. So no, AAA is not dead tomorrow. And yes, great big budget games still exist. That is not the real argument. The real argument is meaner and more useful. The current AAA structure rewards giant costs, safe design, sequel dependence, live service greed, weaker ownership, unstable employment, trend chasing, and executive panic disguised as strategy. That is why so many of it feels loud, glossy, expensive, and empty. Players can feel the scam through the controller. They see $70 launches, giant patches, disappearing content, apology posts, layoffs, deluxe editions, roadmaps, and publishers acting offended when customers ask to actually own the products they paid for. People do not need another fake deep speech about that. They need the obvious thing said clearly. AAA gaming became frustrating because the business rewards caution, control, extraction, and scale more than strong ideas, stable teams, finished games, and respect for the audience.